Today's reading is from Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. It can be found on page 1015 of the church Bibles on the seat in front of you. It's page 1015. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. This is the word of the Lord.
Tom, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to keep Mark chapter 10 open. If you're normally here, you'll be used to that. But if you're visiting, it sounds a little bit sort of strange, maybe even a bit schooly. Apologies for that. But do have it open in front of you, because what I'm going to do is just point to various parts of that little incident, and I hope help us to understand it. Sam's referred already to the question we're thinking about today, and it's this question: what can Jesus do for you? To my mind, that's an obviously very open-ended question, and you can have all sorts of different answers to that. Yes, Jesus, you can sort out my family problems and heal every disease I'll ever catch and make me get the job and all sorts of other things. There's no end of answers you might give. If you go to a traditional shop or even a restaurant, the waitress, the shopkeeper, they'd ask this kind of question: what can I do for you? What can I get you? Feels like you've got a massive choice. Yes, I'll have these 7 things, thank you. But the question's actually one that Jesus asks a couple of people or groups of people in these verses here. If you've got it in front of you, if you can find, it's over the page in my Bible, verse 51, the tiny little number 51. Jesus asked this question of this blind man: "What do you want me to do for you?" Now flick back a page and skim up the page, and if you can find verse 36, he asked exactly the same question to some other people. In verse 36, do you see there? "What do you want me to do for you?" And I want to suggest this morning that how a person answers that question from Jesus will actually reveal a lot about the person. So how you think of the answer to that question from Jesus will reveal quite a lot about you. It will reveal how you see yourself, and it will reveal something of how you see Jesus. Some of you know the story of the man who went to the optician, and the optician asked the man to put his right hand over his left eye and to read the chart on the wall. And the man gets in a terrible muddle. He forgets which is his right hand and which is his left eye. And the optician kind of sympathizes, and so he goes out the back and he finds an old cornflake box, and he cuts a hole in the cornflake box and brings it back into the shop. He puts it on the man's head and he says, "Now, how's that?" And the man says, "Well, it's not too bad, but I was hoping for steel frames like my brother." The question, "What can Jesus do for you?" reveals how you see things. In other words, how you understand things. You know how you say if you get something, you go, "Oh, I see." See in the sense of understand, grasp, appreciate. And the irony in this little story here is that the blind man sees more clearly than other people. That's the shock, the surprise. He understands much better, both about himself and about Jesus as well. So what I want to do this morning is ask 2 simple questions and to encourage you to think of your answers to those questions. Have a think, which answer best fits for me? And we'll need to think of those questions, and there are 2 answers that Mark gives to each question, and have an answer ready because it's possible that someone over coffee will ask you the questions, maybe. But more importantly than that, you need an answer because it will determine a whole lot more than that, as we'll see. Now, the first question, I've alluded to it, is this: how do you see yourself? And the two answers that we get in this bit of Mark are these. Do you see yourself more as boasting before Jesus, or do you see yourself more as begging before Jesus? Now, I appreciate those two phrases. They're quite strong phrases. My guess is we wouldn't automatically have thought in those terms. Boasting is strong, begging is quite strong. But let's see them from this passage and pick up the story. If you've got it there, verse 46 is where we had our reading. Here's Jesus and his disciples. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. So the outskirts of the city, masses and masses of people. A man, Bartimaeus, he's not actually with the crowd because he doesn't manage the crowd because he's blind. And as if being blind wasn't bad enough, this fella's got nothing to rub together by way of money, and therefore he's begging for what he can get. Maybe he's in the same spot each day. He's got his cloak. He's got perhaps a bowl with a few bits of small change to encourage people to give like the buskers do. That's him, blind, begging, sitting by the side of the road. And he's very unlike other people who met Jesus because he can't run up to Jesus. He can't climb a tree and see Jesus. He can't go up and look straight in the eye at Jesus. All he can do is speak, and so he shouts. Verse 47, you can see him or hear him. He heard it was Jesus of Nazareth. He began to shout, here he is, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. It's a man who knows he's in need. We had a teacher at college who was blind. He had a white cane, which he needed around the college. Even with his stick, he knew that for thin doorways and for steps, he needed help. And if someone is blind or partially sighted, you know that for parts of life, you need help. To say, Jesus, have mercy on me, that is a desperate cry for help. If you like, he's saying, Jesus, I've got nothing for you. I deserve nothing from you. Please help me. So he's not just begging for loose change, he's begging for the help he needs. I don't know if you know anyone called Bartimaeus today. It's not a very common name. Bart, possibly, short for Bartholomew, St. Bart's Hospital. I can't remember what Bart Simpson is short for, but you can tell me afterwards. It's interesting, in Mark's gospel, lots of people are healed by Jesus. Only this person gets named. Now, that may be because Mark is saying to some early Christians who first read the gospel, you know Bartimaeus in the church? Here's how he was converted. He's saying either way, here is a true example of a follower of Jesus. Here is someone who really knows what it is to be a Christian, if you like. And part of what it means to be a true Christian, Mark is saying, is to see yourself rightly. Bartimaeus is a picture for you and me before Jesus. And Mark is saying, do you see how before Jesus we are needy? We are like blind beggars, even. I started following Jesus. I was converted when I was about the same age as Clive that we heard from earlier. I didn't have any obvious needs. Very happy upbringing, loving home, no particular dramas. If you'd said to me at that stage, yes, Nick, you're a blind beggar before Jesus, I'd have thought, hang on a second, that's way off the mark. But I came to realize, I think, how good we can be at covering our hearts. There is a sort of smooth exterior that we present to people around us, but inside, a very noisy self-interest. And it doesn't matter whether you're wealthy as background or whether you're not wealthy as a background. It's the same for all of us. I don't know if you relate to things like this, but we frame conversations to highlight ourselves. We plot and we scheme to keep our reputation intact. We fear things. We fight for things because our comfort and the way we want to do things is threatened. And that is all because yapping away inside is a little king called me. And when the reality of the universe is that God is king, that makes us beggars before him. And when we don't think we're doing anything wrong by ignoring God, if you like, that makes us blind beggars. We just don't see the crime of it. Like Bartimaeus, helpless. We've got nothing for Jesus. We deserve nothing from him, but we desperately need help from him. Now, that is a million miles away from the disciples, which are further up the page. We read the question to them, James and John, and they've got a very different attitude. If you just pick out verse 35, it's the top of the column in my version. You can see it at the top there, James and John. Verse 35, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they came to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. That's a very different attitude, isn't it? That's ugly boasting. That's a sort of brashness, a sort of inappropriate self-confidence. Jesus is someone who should fit into my life's plans. So the first question, how do you see yourself? Would you say, you're probably somewhere in the middle is what you're going to say, but would you say you are more boasting before Jesus or begging before him? I mean, imagine like Bartimaeus, you were to meet Jesus. What's the first thing you say to him? Yes, Jesus, I'm glad I've seen you because I've done one or two really good things which I think you'll approve of this week. Jesus, I'm glad I've caught you because the way the world is, I've got one or two questions for you. Or, Jesus, the way I've treated you and ignored you, you need to have mercy on me. That takes to the second question, not how do you see yourself, but how do you see Jesus? Question number 2. And the answers I've summarized here are, do you see him as a sort of personal assistant, or do you see him as the promised king from God? Personal assistant or promised king? The disciples, James and John, they reckon Jesus is special. They've heard that from him, but they treat him like he's a sort of hotel porter. Yes, if you could take my bags, that'll be good for me. Thank you very much, Jesus. And they dismiss his importance, which is very easy to do. And a bit like the old woman in the nursing home. I don't know if you heard this. The Queen, a while ago, was visiting a nursing home in Salisbury. And the nursing home were making all these great preparations for the Queen's visit. Huge occasion. The car drew up outside. And the Queen got out. There was a string quartet that started playing. Lovely occasion. And Her Majesty entered the home to start her tour. And just inside the door on the left was a woman sitting in a chair. And the Queen turned to the woman and she asked her, do you know who I am? And the woman looked at the Queen for a moment and then answered straight away, ask matron, she'll tell you. It's very easy to dismiss the importance of someone. And actually, even those who follow Jesus can dismiss his importance. Jesus is my heavenly service provider, rather than my heavenly Lord. And again, the sweetness of this story is in blind Bartimaeus seeing so much more clearly. So when he cries out, if you dig out verse 47, he doesn't just say, Jesus, have mercy on me. Do you see what he calls him? Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, the title for the promised king, the Messiah, the Christ, who would come. And everyone knew that the Christ would be in the line of the great King David. And there were Old Testament prophets like Isaiah. They'd promised that when he came, this king would do some stunning deeds to prove who he was. So he would heal lame people and he would cure people of blindness. So there's Bartimaeus. He hears about Jesus of Nazareth doing some of these things. And that Jesus of Nazareth is now about to pass his road in front of his spot. And his adrenaline pumps and he shouts out. So he's twigged. He knows he needs the promised king who will do this sort of thing, the one everyone's been waiting for. And now he knows that the Jesus who's about to pass him is that king. It's one thing to see you're in need. It's another thing to see that you need Jesus who's this king. Now just underline, Christ's purpose in coming wasn't to take away all physical problems immediately here and now. His purpose in coming was to forgive sin. That is to forgive the way we live with the little king inside us called me. And he would do that. He'd provide that forgiveness by dying on the cross. At this point in Mark's gospel, Jesus is actually on a bigger journey. He's going from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's where he's going to die. He knows that. That's the plan God has put in place. That was the way God would restore people back to God. Jesus dying on the cross, that's all been done. That restoration work is completed. Just as an aside, by the way, it's very important to realize that what's needed to get back to God has been done. I was just reading a helpful thing the other day, and I think I grew up thinking this. Christianity can be thought of sometimes as good advice. That is, it's telling you something it would be good to do, but it's not happened yet. Advice. Actually, Christianity is a great announcement. It's not advice about what you need to do. It's an announcement about what has already been done, which is such a relief. So it's not asking, do you want to start doing something? Clive and Jane weren't sort of presented with that question. No, Christianity asks, do you want to benefit from something that's already been done? In Jesus, God has done it. He's made it possible to be restored back to him. That was the plan. That is the plan. Now, James and John here, they're behaving as if life is all about their plan. Oh, yes, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask you. Could you fit in with how we'd like things to be? This is our life, and you need to serve us. If you've got any contact with children at any stage of life, you may know these things, the rear seat of a car steering wheel, the toy thing you sort of suction onto the window so the children can play and drive the car at the same time. And you can imagine the child getting lost in their daydreaming, thinking that the car is turning left because they turned the wheel left. It's all about what they want and what they're doing. That's what matters for the child. So the question, how do you see Jesus? It's like asking, who do you think is in the driving seat of everything? Here's James and John. They're saying, our life is about us and Jesus' place in it. Bartimaeus is saying something different. He's saying, no, I get it. Life is about the promised king from God and how I'm going to relate to him. So what's the main feature in life? Who's really at the center? Who is it who needs to get in line with whom? Are you hoping Jesus fits your plans? Or do you see that Jesus is the king in God's plan for our good, for the world? So how do you see Jesus? Personal assistant or the promised king? I love it the way here Bartimaeus is so set on what he knows. He's not affected by what people around him think, which is the challenge, isn't it? To think independently according to what you can see. Bartimaeus sees who Jesus is despite all the comments in verse 48. See, they don't like what he's saying. They get a bit annoyed with him. Can you see verse 48? Many rebuked him. They told him to be quiet. Bartimaeus, shut up. The rabbi hasn't got time for you. He's got more important things to do. And Bartimaeus just shouts all the more. And it's true that if a person starts admitting that they're needy before Jesus, that'll bring comments from those around us. Where in society is it a virtue to be humble or to ask for help? Who nowadays takes Jesus seriously as someone who's come from God to do good for the world? So we need to answer the questions knowing others will think very differently. And just to finish the episode here, verse 49, that must have been a great moment if you have a look for Bartimaeus. Remember, there's lots of people, lots of noise, and then Jesus brings the whole crowd to a standstill. Everyone goes quiet. Who's he looking at? What's he want? Why is he pointing over there? And Jesus says, call him. And if you're Bartimaeus, this is the most significant moment of your life. The next thing you realize is someone jabbing you on the side of the leg and saying, cheer up, he's calling you. And no one's ever stopped for you before. No one's ever called you because they wanted you. You've been a nuisance up to now, and here is someone stopping because they want to do business with you. They want to help you. I think for many people today, the thought of God coming to earth in Jesus and being interested in them is sort of beyond believable. There was some research done a couple of years ago. The 3 most common words used to describe Jesus. I wonder what you think they'd be. spiritual, loving, and peaceful. But when you read him in action in the Gospels, you can't help but see that Jesus is very personal. Bartimaeus is told, he's calling you. God can handle the whole world and yours and my little worlds within it. So don't assume you're beyond Jesus' concern. 2 questions. How do you see yourself? How do you see Jesus? Boasting or begging? Do you see him as an assistant to you or a king who loves you, who you want to serve? If there's one more question, it could be this: how do you see being a Christian? And we've heard it from Clive and Jane, and it's over the page if you're still in Mark. It is to follow Jesus. Verse 50, Bartimaeus is called. He throws his cloak aside, jumps to his feet. He came to Jesus. Beggars don't have very much, but even what he has now, Bartimaeus casts aside because he's realized something about Jesus. And I think it's worth knowing, isn't it? Following Jesus, being a Christian, it doesn't mean we stop all the things we love or the good things we enjoy. It's just that we don't need those things like we need this king. And so even precious things come second to him. And then Jesus gives Bartimaeus the opportunity, if you like. Verse 51, you think it's a strange question at this stage. What do you want me to do for you? Well, isn't that obvious? Jesus should see that or know that. He's giving Bartimaeus a chance to express what he now realizes, to express what Jesus will call faith. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight. He followed Jesus along the road. Don't get muddled, by the way, what faith is. Faith always sounds like a sort of dollop of stuff you can't quite grasp, that you're either born with or you're not. Faith, according to Jesus here, it's to see yourself truly and to see Jesus truly. Faith is seeing that you're in need and realizing that Jesus is the one you need. It is to come to Jesus because you've seen those things. Now, I appreciate that these are very simple questions in a way, but they are very big questions. And I think for many here, you've done the big thinking on these big questions. We know the life of following Jesus. We've been Christians perhaps for some time, decades maybe. Can I encourage you not to move on from knowing your need of Jesus? That is every day, Clive alluded to it, we need him, we need his word to keep us going. Don't slip into treating Jesus as your assistant. He's still the promised king who's died for the world, who has your best interests at heart. His life is about you. Your life is about him and not you. But you can trust him to organize your life in the best way. I think some people will think, well, I've got more big thinking to do on this. And it may be that something like Christianity Explored is a helpful thing. You've got lots of questions, and it's good to be able to answer those and ask them. Can I remind you, do come and join us on the 5th of November. There'll be a chance to ask and answer those questions as another group for Christianity Explored on that Sunday. It may be that for one or two, though, you feel you've done enough big thinking. You haven't finished all your thinking, you haven't got all the answers you want, but you've done enough to come to Jesus and to start following him. I'm going to just read out a very short prayer, which would be a form of words you could use to say to Jesus, yes, I want to come to you now because I do see what Bartimaeus saw. What I'll do is I'll read the prayer fairly quickly so you know what is in it, and then I'll leave a few seconds for us to gather our thoughts, and I'll say it again with some pauses, and if you'd like to echo it in your heart, then I'd urge you to do that, even today. Let me read the prayer. It's going to say this: Dear Lord Jesus, thank you that you are the promised King from God. Sorry that I've lived with me as King. Thank you for dying on the cross to forgive my sin. Please forgive me and help me to leave aside everything to follow you. Amen. That's the prayer. So just take a few moments just in the quiet, and then I'll start the prayer again and leave a pause for any who want to echo it for themselves, just in the quietness of your heart. Here's the prayer again. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you that you are the promised King from God. Sorry that I have lived with me as King. Thank you for dying on the cross to forgive my sin. Please forgive me and help me to leave aside everything to follow you. Amen. If you've echoed that prayer for the very first time, then there's no more wonderful thing you can say to Jesus. That's an enormous thing and a wonderful thing. Can I encourage you to come and grab one of these booklets from me? I'm going to be up at the front. This outlines what we've thought about, just in different words, and another outline prayer too for acknowledging who Jesus is. So grab one of these from me. I'll just be down here by my bag down there. Don't forget the postcards for Christianity Explored. There's a few designs there at the information point just at the back before you head through for coffee.